ever feel like you're surrounded by people but still feel kind of alone? You know, like you're constantly on but never really connecting.
Yeah.
It's like a weird paradox, right?
It is.
Well, today we're going deep with Carl Jung to figure out why that is and what we can do about it.
That feeling of being surrounded by noise and stimulation, but craving quiet, that's not weakness.
No.
No. Jung actually saw that as a signal, like a signal calling us to connect with ourselves on a much deeper level.
Interesting. So it's like a compass
Yeah,
pointing us inward.
exactly.
And especially in today's world, it's so easy to lose that inner compass. I mean, we're bombarded with information, external demands, you name it.
You're absolutely right. That's exactly what Jung was getting at. He was really ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
So how does solitude fit into all of this?
Well, Jung believed that those quiet spaces, away from all the chatter and distractions, that's where the real magic happens.
Okay, so what exactly did he mean by solitude?
He saw it as the key, really, to unlocking our potential, our creativity, our truest selves even.
I like that. So in this deep dive, our mission is to explore Jung's ideas about solitude,
Right.
why he thought it was so important,
Yeah,
and most importantly, how we can actually invite more of it into our own lives.
exactly.
And just to be clear, this isn't about becoming a hermit or anything like that. It's about finding that sweet spot,
Yeah.
that balance
Right.
between connection and just having the space to be.
Absolutely. To really understand Jung's perspective, it helps to remember the time he was living in.
Yeah.
World wars,
Oh, yeah.
rapid technological advancements, this huge shift in traditional values.
It was a time of upheaval, wasn't it?
immense upheaval and uncertainty.
Yeah.
People were feeling lost.
That's interesting because in a lot of ways, it feels like we're going through a similar thing today.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like swap out world wars for social media wars and, well, it feels eerily familiar.
It does.
Yeah.
And Jung, he recognized this growing disconnect from our inner selves. He saw it happening even back then.
And he believed that solitude could help.
He believed that intentionally embracing solitude could bridge that gap, create a space to reconnect with our own thoughts and feelings and values, all amidst the chaos.
It's like hitting the pause button.
Yes, exactly.
Giving ourselves permission to just be.
To just be.
You know, there's this quote by Jung that really resonates with me. He said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you."
That's a powerful one.
It is, because it highlights how you can be surrounded by people, constantly interacting, but still feel deeply alone.
Like being in a crowded room, but feeling completely invisible.
Exactly. And I think sometimes it's in those moments of feeling unseen or unheard, that the call to solitude becomes the strongest.
It's like an inner voice saying, hey, pay attention, something's off here.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, how often do we really share what truly matters to us? Especially in a world where we're often presenting these carefully curated versions of ourselves online.
It's a good question. And maybe, just maybe, solitude is the key to rediscovering those authentic parts of ourselves that we've tucked away, the parts that we've maybe been afraid to share.
And that leads us to one of the most fascinating and maybe slightly intimidating concepts in Jungian psychology, the shadow.
Ah, yes, the shadow.
Okay, so from what I understand, the shadow, it's not just about hiding our flaws, right?
Right.
It's about all those parts of ourselves, good and bad, that we disown because they make us uncomfortable or don't fit the image we want to project.
You got it. The shadow isn't just about those so-called negative traits,
Yeah.
like jealousy or anger. It also includes those positive qualities that we might suppress for different reasons.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Maybe we were told as kids that certain talents weren't valuable,
Yeah.
or that certain emotions were unacceptable to express, so we just shut them down.
So it's like all these disowned parts of ourselves get shoved into this basement of our psyche.
Yeah, kind of.
But they don't just disappear, do they? Jung believed they could actually manifest in unhealthy ways if we didn't acknowledge them.
He did. Big time. Like, for example, someone who is constantly criticizing other people for being arrogant, they might actually be projecting their own unacknowledged arrogance onto those around them.
Oh, wow. Projection.
Exactly.
That's pretty powerful. But I think it's important to remember that this isn't about, dwelling on these shadow aspects or beating ourselves up about them.
No, not at all.
It's about creating a space, and maybe solitude can help with that, to understand where they come from, and maybe even integrate them into a more whole and authentic version of ourselves.
That's exactly what Jung believed. that true personal growth doesn't happen by denying parts of ourselves, but by embracing the full complexity of who we are.
All the messy bits included.
All the messy bits. And he argued that solitude is that crucible, that space where transformation can occur.
This reminds me of Jung's Red Book. Can you talk a bit about that?
Mm-hmm.
I know it was this incredibly personal work that he created during a period of intense introspection.
It's remarkable. Jung filled it with his dreams, his visions, all these explorations of his own psyche. He actually referred to this period as a confrontation with the unconscious.
Wow. A confrontation with the unconscious. That's intense.
He wasn't afraid to face those depths, and he believed everyone has the capacity to do the same.
I'm starting to see how this all ties together. It's like solitude becomes this bridge.
The bridge.
Yeah, allowing us to connect with those lost parts of ourselves, understand them,
Yeah.
integrate them
Yeah.
into this richer, more complete sense of self. It's not just about being alone. It's about becoming more fully who we are.
I like that. Very well said. And it's important to remember that Jung wasn't advocating for complete isolation or anything. He saw the value in both solitude and connection.
Okay, so then how do we find that balance? How do we reconcile the need for meaningful relationships with this need for deep introspective work?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one we'll keep exploring as we continue our deep dive into Jung's ideas about solitude.
So we were talking about the balance between solitude and connection. Like, how do we nurture those deeper connections with others while still making time for that inner work?
Jung actually believed that solitude is essential for creating those really authentic, fulfilling relationships.
Really?
Yeah. I thought, if we haven't taken the time to really understand ourselves, to be comfortable with our own company, how can we truly connect with someone else on a deeper level?
That makes sense. Like, you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
Exactly. You need to replenish those inner resources first.
Right.
And solitude, it gives you that space to do it, to reconnect with your values, process your emotions, tap into your own creativity, intuition, all those things.
And then when you come to your relationships from that place,
you're so much better equipped to offer genuine presence, understanding.
So it's not selfish to prioritize solitude, even if you've got a partner, family, friends who need you.
Not at all. It's an act of self-care that actually benefits everyone.
Because you're showing up as a better version of yourself.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be this big thing. It's not about becoming a recluse or neglecting your responsibilities.
No, it's about finding those small moments.
Just weaving those moments of solitude into your everyday life, even if it's just for a few minutes at a time.
Okay, that makes sense. But I know what our listeners are probably thinking right now.
What's that?
How? How do you actually do this? How do you make space for solitude in the middle of our crazy, busy lives?
There are a lot of different approaches, really. Jung wasn't so much about rigid rules, more about figuring out what works for each person.
So no chanting in a cave for a week required.
Only if that's your thing.
Okay.
One really simple but powerful thing Jung recommended was daily reflection.
Daily reflection.
Even just 10, 15 minutes of quiet time. Could be journaling, meditation, just sitting in stillness, paying attention to your breath.
I've tried incorporating those little meditation sessions into my morning routine.
Oh,
and honestly, it's kind of amazing how much calmer and centered I feel throughout the day. It's like starting off with a clear mind instead of jumping right into that chaos.
That's great. And the key is consistency. Making it a daily ritual, even if it's just for a little bit, helps you cultivate that inner connection, build that self-awareness.
So daily reflection, that's one tool. What else did Jung suggest?
He was a big believer in spending time in nature. He thought nature had this calming, restorative effect on the psyche, helps us connect to something larger than ourselves.
I can totally see that. Sometimes when I feel overwhelmed or disconnected, I will go for a walk in the park or sit by the ocean.
Yeah.
It's like my whole system just resets.
I get that. Nature gives you this sense of perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
A reminder that we're part of something bigger, lets your thoughts settle. And that's when new insights and inspiration can come through.
So we've got daily reflection, connecting with nature. These are all things we can realistically do, even if we're super busy. But what about those tougher parts of ourselves, the shadow stuff we were talking about before? How does solitude help with that?
Well, that's where this technique called active imagination comes in.
Active imagination.
It's a Jungian practice where you intentionally engage with your unconscious mind, often through writing or visualization exercises.
I've heard of that, but I'm not sure I really get it. How does that work?
Let's say you're dealing with a fear or insecurity that keeps popping up.
Okay.
Instead of trying to ignore it, You could try writing a dialogue with that fear,
A dialogue.
like it's a separate entity. Ask it questions, listen to what it has to say, see what comes up.
So you're basically having a conversation with your fear.
Pretty much. It's a way to bring it out of the shadows and make sense of it.
Mm.
The goal isn't to destroy it or anything, but to integrate it into your understanding of yourself.
So that you can move through it.
Right. It's through that acceptance that we can really heal and grow.
This is making me realize that solitude isn't about escaping reality or being self-absorbed. It's about facing those deeper truths about ourselves.
Even the messy ones.
Exactly, so that we can show up in the world with more honesty, more compassion.
You're so right. And speaking of honesty, another way to embrace solitude is through creative expression. Jung really believed that creativity is this natural human impulse, and solitude gives it the space to flourish.
It makes me think of what we were saying earlier, about how we often feel most creative in those quiet moments, like in the shower or on a walk.
Because your mind isn't so cluttered.
Yeah. It's like those quiet spaces allow new ideas and insights to come to the surface.
Exactly. And it doesn't really matter what form that creative expression takes. It could be painting, writing, dancing, gardening, playing music.
Yeah.
Anything. It's about connecting with that inner spark and letting it flow.
It's not about being good at it or creating something perfect. It's just about giving yourself permission to play, to explore, to create without judgment.
And sometimes the coolest stuff comes from those moments of just messing around, not trying to force anything or meet other people's expectations.
So we've talked about daily reflection, connecting with nature, active imagination, creative expression. That's a pretty good toolkit already.
Right.
But let's be honest, we live in a world where we're constantly plugged in. How do we manage that? How do we unplug when everything's vying for our attention?
That's where the practice of unplugging comes in. Consciously disconnecting from all the digital stuff for set periods of time. Create that space for solitude and reflection.
I'm not going to lie, that's a tough one for me. It's so easy to get sucked into constantly checking my phone, scrolling social media, responding to emails.
It's like your mind never gets a break.
Exactly.
And it's not just the mental clutter. It's the emotional energy we're putting out there. You're getting bombarded with information, opinions, images.
It can be exhausting.
It's a lot, even if we don't always realize it.
It's like we're giving our attention to everything and everyone except ourselves.
Yeah. Unplugging helps you reclaim that attention, direct it inward. It gives you that space to recharge, to process, to just be present with yourself without all those demands from the digital world.
Okay, I see how all these practices, the daily reflection, connecting with nature, active imagination, creative expression, unplugging, how they all work together to help us find more solitude. But I'm curious, what happens when we actually start doing these things? What kind of internal changes might we see? We've been talking about all these practical ways to invite more solitude into our lives, but I'm curious about the bigger picture. Like what happens when we start actually doing this work? What kind of shifts might we see internally?
That's a great question. It's almost like you're embarking on this archaeological dig, you know? But instead of uncovering these ancient artifacts, we're unearthing hidden parts of ourselves.
I like that. So what kind of treasures might we find, as we delve deeper into these uncharted territories inside?
Well, one of the most profound shifts that Jung observed in people who really embrace solitude was this greater sense of self-awareness.
So it's not just about, feeling calmer or more creative.
Right.
It's about developing a much deeper understanding of who we are at our core.
Exactly.
What makes us tick, what our values are, where our strengths and weaknesses lie. All of it.
Yeah, and as that self-awareness grows, it often leads to a greater sense of self-acceptance too.
Yeah.
Start to embrace all of it, the light and the shadow.
Our whole package.
The whole package, flaws and all.
And that acceptance can be so freeing.
Absolutely. It's like we can finally let go of that need to present this perfect, curated version of ourselves to the world.
And just be who we are.
Exactly. And embrace all those imperfections.
I love that. And from that place of self-acceptance, what happens then?
Well, often a new sense of confidence emerges and resilience.
Yeah.
You're not so easily swayed by outside pressure or opinions anymore because you're grounded in a deeper understanding of yourself.
That makes me think of Jung's idea of individuation,
Yeah.
Becoming a whole integrated self. Is that what we're talking about here?
Absolutely. Individuation is the process of becoming who you truly are, not who you think you should be based on what society says or, all those external expectations. And Jung saw solitude as a key part of that whole journey.
Because it gives us that space to strip away those layers of conditioning.
Yeah.
And reconnect with our own unique essence.
Exactly. It's like you're shedding all those masks that you wear for other people and finally coming face to face with yourself.
Which can be kind of scary.
It can. It can be challenging for sure, but also incredibly exciting.
Because you're meeting yourself for the first time.
Right. You're confronting those parts of yourself you've been avoiding or questioning beliefs you've held for a long time.
It's stepping into the unknown.
Exactly. And Jung believed that it's in that discomfort, in that willingness to be with what you don't know, that real transformation happens. He said that by facing those shadow parts of ourselves, we can integrate them into a more whole and balanced sense of self.
So it's not about getting rid of those challenging parts of ourselves, but about understanding them and accepting them as part of who we are.
Beautifully said. And as we do that, as we get more comfortable with the full spectrum of who we are, we often find that those qualities we saw as weaknesses can actually become strengths.
They can.
Yeah, they can.
Yeah.
So for our listener out there, if they're feeling overwhelmed or disconnected, unsure of themselves or what they want, what would you say to them?
That's a great question.
I would say that the answers they're looking for, those are already inside them. The clarity, the wisdom, the guidance, it's all there waiting to be discovered. And solitude can be the key that unlocks it.
It's like we've been searching outside ourselves for so long, looking for validation, for answers, for directions.
Right.
But what if the most fulfilling journey is the one that takes us within?
What if by embracing solitude, you're not getting away, but actually getting closer to who you're meant to be? That's worth thinking about, isn't it?
It really is. It's a reminder that sometimes those most amazing discoveries aren't made out there in the busy world, but in the quiet of our own hearts.
And it's in those quiet spaces where we can meet ourselves with curiosity and compassion. That's where we begin to unlock our true potential and live a more authentic and meaningful life.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into Carl Jung and the power of solitude. We hope you've gotten some good stuff out of it and feel inspired to create some space for yourself for your own journey of self-discovery.
Give yourself that gift.
Exactly. Until next time, embrace the quiet and see what happens.